Today, we are delighted to have Angela Torres and Laura Wentworth, two of the co-authors of the newly published book, A Guide to Detracking Math Courses, The Journey to Realize Equity and Access in K-12 Mathematics Education. Angela Torres is a professional learning coordinator for the UC San Diego Mathematics Project. Previously, Angela served as a math content specialist in San Francisco Unified School District, where she supported secondary math teachers through professional development, coaching, and curriculum support for almost a decade. She was a part of the team that proposed the adopted Detract math policy and managed the complex instruction program in SFUSD. Laura Wentworth is the Director of Research Practice Partnerships at California Education Partners. For over a decade, Laura has worked to unite research, policy, and practice by directing the Stanford University and San Francisco Unified School District partnership. She also supported the development of the Stanford Sequoia K-12 Research Collaborative and is a lecturer at Stanford University. Laura has served on the founding steering committee for the National Network of Education Research Practice Partnerships, and in 2020, received the Alumni Excellence in Education Early Career Award from Stanford University Graduate School of Education. And now, please welcome Angela and Laura.
Hello, everyone. Good evening, good afternoon. My name is Angela Torres. And you just heard a little bit about me, and I'm going to just pass it off to Laura just to say hello real quick.
Hi, everyone. Laura Wentworth. Good to see you.
So today, Laura, if you go to the next slide, our objective today is to really take you through many of the key concepts that we have in the new book. If you have heard us speak before on the SFUSD math journey, this is going to be slightly different. As you heard from Margaret, Laura and I actually currently do not work in SFUSD. I have transitioned from the role in the math team. And so we're using many of the lessons learned that you'll hear in the book, many of the ideas that we felt were instrumental to coming to a Detract pathway and supporting it along the way. And we really want to help you in your context through some of the ideas. So you'll hear some of the examples from SFUSD, but that's not really the main objective for today. So first, we'll start with identifying some key terms that you'll hear us discuss, and then we'll get into this idea, some of the important ideas around setting a vision and how that's important to the Detract pathways, to understanding your context and how your context is different than, say, the San Francisco context or to another district's context, how you can design some Detract course map pathways, how you can support your teachers through having heterogeneous classrooms, how you can use your school schedules and redesign them in order to continue to support these kinds of pathways, following with how research and data can support you along your journey. And we will end today with some Q&A. All right, so we have some key terms here. So the first one is about tracking. We're talking about detracking, we're talking about tracking. So tracking, historically, this system has separated our students, especially in math classes, into either groups or classes based on perceived abilities, using often grades, teacher recommendations, maybe test scores, and so on. And the big thing around tracks is that once you're in a particular track, so say you have a high track and a low track, you're often on that track all the way through your schooling system, and students are not able and do not move to other tracks. Where we are talking now about detracking, and so we are trying to change this system into a system where all students are in heterogeneous classes. Teachers are using instructional strategies to support our students' differing strengths and needs. And then you'll also hear this idea of acceleration. Acceleration is different from tracking, but it's related. So oftentimes you'll need to learn an amount of content, not skip content, but learn it in a shortened amount of time due to trying to take additional courses in high school. And so you're doing this either in doubling up or maybe in a compressed course. And so you'll hear us talk about acceleration. The difference, and you can go to the next one, Laura, is as we work towards equity, we want our students to have equal footing coming in. So to be able to have access to the rich content, and to achieve equity, we believe that we need the processes to provide different resources for all of our students to support them to have equal outcomes. So if we have accelerated options, then our accelerated option classes look like heterogeneous classes. They still look like the population of your school. They are not tracked, separating our kids into different courses. Okay. So where we really begin with everything, the foundation is the vision. And so a question for us to you all is, what is the vision for an equity-based math classroom that you are hoping your students will experience in your mathematics program? Now, you may have a vision, I hope you do, but does your school, does your team, does your district have a written out vision? Are all of your partners, teachers, administrators, coaches, families, clear about what the vision looks like and sounds like and feels like? And how can your team become more coherent on this vision? So throughout this presentation, you'll hear us talk about reaching this vision and using our pathways to promote an equitable vision for all of our students in our math classes. If you can go to the next one. So here's the example from San Francisco Unified. It was our driving statement: all students will make sense of rigorous mathematics in ways that are creative, interactive, and relevant in heterogeneous classrooms. And I feel like when I say this, I was in San Francisco in that role for 9 years, and this statement drove what we were trying to accomplish. And as we went about this, we realized that we really needed to bring in, we had guiding principles, and here you'll see 2 of our premises that we worked with teachers and leaders to really understand that all of our students are mathematically brilliant, period. Just they are. Let's start with that premise. And the idea of a premise is that we can, we want to reach it, and yet in the day-to-day, we might not feel it, but I can know that it's there. So I'm pushing myself and my colleagues to work to see those brilliance. Now, this brilliance of our students is not possible if we see math as a ladder. So the second premise that we added was that math is a web and not a ladder. If you have a math vision and you know it and you want to copy and paste it and put it into the chat, I've seen now, working with other districts and schools, I've seen other vision statements that are beautiful and wonderful and specific. So, and in the book, we talk about, you might say that you want a discourse-rich vision, but what that means to you and what that means to a colleague might be very different. What it might mean to your math team and what it might mean to your multilingual team, who are both supporting the same teachers, might be very different. So having a vision statement that you can leverage is a really important and crucial piece of the work that you are trying to work with teachers to unpack what this means, what this look like. It's the beginning to the work. Go ahead, Laura. So you want to have your vision explicitly written out so that your values and beliefs around equity are there, and you can use this statement then to leverage both internally as you work with other departments or other leaders, and externally as you're maybe speaking across with another school district or speaking with families. And your leaders must learn how to communicate that vision with others, right? Is it the same, just like we were talking about, is it the same vision? Are we, what I'm going for as a coach, or what a site-based coach is going for versus a district-based coach? Are we supporting the same kinds of ideas that are all working towards the same vision?
Okay, my turn. So, similar to what Angela was saying earlier, how each school district, state, classroom may have its own vision. That's kind of a great example of how in each setting, each school district or classroom, school will have a different policy context. It will have different variables that are influencing their journey to detrack math classes. So we want to make sure you come away with two ideas: that policy contexts in schools and districts have both explicit and implicit levels. For example, at the explicit level, each of your settings has specific students, staff, and classrooms that have unique characteristics. Similarly, at schools, you might have schools that are in one neighborhood versus another neighborhood. You might have schools that are in urban settings versus rural settings. Similarly, districts come in different sizes and shapes. And these are very explicit ways that your context may look different. Also, each community has the community, the state, and the federal policy context also influence the context that you're going to be detracking in. So, for example, your state may have certain laws on the books or certain policies that you need to follow that is going to influence how you go about detracking. So these are explicit. These are things you can see in documentation, written in goals or in, mission statements of schools. But some of the more implicit things that influence your context, we want to call out two of them. There's many. We can make a big list here. But one of them is the levels of power that different people and organization and leaders may have that influence how much their voices or their opinions are amplified or actually suppressed or oppressed. Also, people or people can also have biases, either personal or professional biases, that may favor certain racial groups, that may favor certain genders, that may favor certain teachers or students or leaders or different concepts or values. And so we wanted to call out that biases and levels of power among individuals and organizations will be interacting in your context. So given the explicit and the implicit, we call out specific things that we think are lessons learned from San Francisco and beyond, that when you're specifically going about detracking, it's important to pay attention to these variables in a policy context. So the number one thing we have on the list is your leadership. So do the leaders in your system believe in your detracking effort? Are they willing to stand behind it? If you don't have a leader that's willing to stand behind your detracking effort, this is going to influence how your detracking effort is going to play out. Also, your school or your district or even your state could have goals that are either supportive of your detracking effort or not supportive of your detracking effort. And so you need to pay attention to those. Another thing that has played out in San Francisco, plays out in many communities, are there actual legal decrees that influence a local or state context that limit the way that you can shape policy. So it's important to pay attention to those. Also, there could be existing policies and practices that have been in place for years that people may or may not be aware of that could influence your efforts at detracking. So another variable are influential community groups. So that could be everywhere from the teachers union to parent groups to student groups to administrators unions that have viewpoints around either for or against detracking. We also point out the reality of historical events. For example, certain communities have had major efforts at desegregating their schools. That might be true for some more than others. So it's important to know what are the efforts that are influencing, the variables that are influencing your policy context. So, go ahead and write in the chat, are there certain variables that are unique to your context that you're thinking about as you go on your detracking journey? Okay, I'm going to pass it off, I think, to Angela.
Yeah. So as you're thinking about a detracked course pathway, or even where in your pathway can you have some detract classes, we recognize that it might not be possible for you in the moment to detrack your entire pathway. But when you are having a detract pathway, how does your course pathways reflect the vision and beliefs in your students? So going back to that vision statement we talked about, if you have a vision statement around equity and yet you are tracked, you are contradicting the vision that you have. So you really want to make sure that they are aligned and figure out, how can I make my pathways more aligned with my vision? So you want to start with, well, what are the current math pathways that are in my system and maybe the next system? So if you think about maybe a K-8 district, and there's a different high school district, what is the pathway for students across that secondary success or across the K-12, TK-12 success? Who and what does success look like in these pathways? Which groups of students experience or do not experience success? And how can you change your pathways to eliminate or minimize tracking, especially for all students to see themselves as doers of mathematics? That's really where we want to start. Which means if they love math, they are taking more math and they are taking and meeting their mathematics requirements, both for high school and for post-secondary. And you want to have a rigorous fourth year math option that includes things like AP mathematics. Go ahead and go on to the next one. So here's the San Francisco Unified Secondary Course Pathways. Currently, this was unanimously adopted by the Board of Education back in 2014. And so as we were trying to go through our question, so I'm going to go back. When you are creating one, it goes back to what Laura said about context. So our context at the time was learning how to implement the new Common Core state standards that were coming out in California and trying to figure out what the courses would be for that progression of learning. In that case, as we had a new Math 8, we needed space for students to reach AP Calculus, just part of the reality. And so we decided after many, many months of conversations and debate and consultation to have a heterogeneous course pathway, Math 6, 7, and 8, through 9th and 10th grade, Algebra 1 and Geometry. We stuck at the time with a traditional sequence. And then we left decision points, and I'll come back to those in a moment, where we had a compressed Algebra 2 pre-calculus course and an Algebra 2 course so that students could reach AP Calculus. Decision points in these moments are decision points. They're not points where the school is making decisions. These are decision points by students and families. And we will discuss that in a moment. What you will see is you don't have any honors courses and you do not have remedial courses. So our hope was to keep our classes as heterogeneous as possible moving up. And as we went through, we ended up with a couple more acceleration options, but we always held the line at middle school. So up through Math 8, we really wanted our students to have a strong foundation in the deep learning and the mathematics that is there. What was difficult is this name of Algebra 1 is the same course name as the previous course pathways, but the Algebra 1, the old Algebra 1 was very different. So there was a lot of communication that needed to go and still needs to go into what is the difference between the old Algebra 1 that maybe you took or your older child took that is different, where a lot of that content is in the Math 8 course and the progression leading up and how these courses have changed. So this is just one example of of how to expand your pathway. If you go to the next one, as we were going, we realized that all of our schools were not able to have the Algebra 2 pre-calc compression course. And so we offered a couple other options for schools. So our first idea was the same recommended one with the compression course. The second one was having students double up taking geometry and Algebra 2 in 10th grade. So again, trying to hold off that heterogeneity as long as possible. And when you did have students doubling up, say 10th graders taking geometry and Algebra 2, the 10th graders should not be in a separate Algebra 2 course. So that's the idea of keeping something heterogeneous while allowing for acceleration. The students would be mixed in with other 11th graders or other students taking Algebra 2. The third option is doubling up in 9th grade. And then a fourth option currently, because of funds from the city, was an accelerated summer geometry course, which all of these acceleration options have their pluses and minuses. You know, they have their challenges, and they are all different based on the size of the school. Doubling up takes funding, takes additional full-time teaching positions, depending on how many kids you have. Doubling up, accelerated summer geometry came with funding from the city. So we're not saying that this is the only way to do this, but this was our way of allowing for acceleration options, allowing for the variety of the context of our schools. We have very small high schools, and we also have very large high schools. And for options based on students. Doubling up can take away an elective option or a language class if you're a multilingual learner. So that might not be the best option for all students. And if you go to the next one, and I know there's some questions coming up in the chat, but we'll hold those till the end. So another way to diversify your course options, and this is, you saw what San Francisco has in the moment. There's a recent policy analysis in California that talks about additional fourth-year option math course options that have come up recently. This is very recent, as in February of this year. And again, so here's a couple of the quotes first, and then I'll talk about what some of these options are in California. So first, we know that there's benefits of taking advanced math courses in high school. And yet we know that not all students are accessing these and not experiencing these ideas equally. Go ahead to go to the next quote. The other idea is that high school math course taking traditionally follows a sequence that leads to calculus as the capstone. But there is still a lot of debate around necessity of calculus. It's hard to convince somebody that you don't need calculus. We're not here to convince parents that you don't need to take it. We want to give you options. And we also want families to know that in California, for the UC and Cal State admissions, we do have statements that we try to help parents understand that from the admissions offices, they do say that you do not need calculus, that it is better to have 4 years of strong, deep math. And so through this publication, if you click next, there are additional fourth-year options that are approved by the California universities. We have discrete mathematics, we have data science, we have a mathematical reasoning with connection, a quantitative reasoning course, and some transition to college math and statistics and transition to college level mathematics courses. So these are all additional courses that are out there that some schools and some districts are using across California. They're fairly new. So not everywhere has them, and that you still have to consider a lot of different reasons. And in the next slide, I'll talk about how you might think about whether or not to add more courses. So when you're creating equitable course pathways, you want to think about, how can I create and provide heterogeneous classrooms? Why? Because if you believe that all students are mathematically brilliant, then you should be able to build off of one another and have heterogeneous classrooms if you really believe that all of your students are mathematically brilliant. You have to be able to support your families and students to understand decision points. Because going back to what Laura talked about, there are biases that come out. And so you could have, even with these decision points, a counselor or a particular teacher or an administrator. We have influence as adults for our students. You should take this class. You should take this class. You finished your math requirements. Don't bother next year, your senior year, just take a year off. So all of these things come into how students decide. And when we don't pay attention, then these families deciding are still the families who have been, and the students who've been successful in the past. So some of the things we took away in particular were not allowing decision points to be based on test scores or grades or even teacher recommendation. We found that students, even going and asking for it, it's like, why would I go and ask for a recommendation? Because I'm seeing on this flyer that went home that I don't meet these requirements. So I'm not smart. I can't do that. Or we also want it to be informed by the broader understanding of graduation. Many families, every school district is different. And I've seen in California, in San Francisco, the high school graduation requirement is 3 years of mathematics, algebra 1 and beyond, where in other districts, it's only 2 years. But getting into university is often 3 years. And we know that that 4th year gap of not taking math because you met your requirement, and then you go into college and you're trying to take your beginning quantitative reasoning courses, you've had this gap of a year not learning and not continuing with your math muscle. So that makes it difficult. And so we want our students to take these courses because we believe in them, because we know they can do it, and because we know it'll be best for them. And you need to make sure that this work is so hard. It is difficult, it is complicated, and that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, but it does mean that teachers need to have the space for collaboration. And Laura will talk a little bit later about schedules and structures. But when you think about 4th year math options, you don't want to just say, hey, let's just add all these options, because now in your school schedule, you've siloed teachers. And that is something that you don't want to do. You also want to make sure that all of the additional courses that you are putting out are actually math courses and not an elective course, which some schools have for good reasons, but we have to help the families understand those decisions. Okay, so so you have a structure, right? You have a structure of a policy or of a particular pathways, but we have to support our teachers. And I think I just started to talk a little bit about that. So here we want to talk about how can we support teachers through the curriculum, through professional development, and through coaching. If we do not support our teachers, and if we have heterogeneous classrooms, the same inequities will exist. So we have to learn how to see all of our students' strengths, how to see in order to make that vision happen and make it possible. So again, you start with the vision, okay? All right, so we're gonna start with curriculum. The question is does your curriculum support heterogeneous math classrooms? Which means, does it include math tasks and activities that will provide access and rigor for all students? And does it expand what it means to do math and who can be good at math? If your curriculum continues to be very like naked math, just algebraic, it's about answers, 50 problems, it's not talking about multiple representations, then the same hierarchies will exist around who has been successful and who is not. And that's not mathematics anymore. Mathematics is problem solving and asking questions and wondering out loud and building on other people's thinking. And so we have to help change the narrative that our students have come into our classrooms with. And that starts with the curriculum that we put in front of our kids and in front of our teachers. The curriculum, if it is not supporting teachers to understand the content and the learning objectives and the big ideas, then they are making sense of it on their own, often bringing in their past experiences. And the same with instructional strategies. If the instructional strategies are not called out in the curriculum, then that is supporting the vision, supporting group work, supporting discourse with students, supporting multiple representations, then again, teachers might go into that old linear fashion of what math is. And it also needs to help our students. Can our students understand what they're learning, what they're talking about? Is it helping them interact with one another? So that is the first really grounding of what you need in front of your teachers and in front of your students, that you're supporting this pathway for students across many different years. Great. And then, so for professional development, you see that we have two visions up here. With the coaching, we talked about the vision of a math classroom. We also, and I talked a little bit about teachers needing to collaborate, but we need to provide teachers with a vision of what an adult learning community can be, what's possible for collaboration. Collaboration at the basics, many teachers show up to their PLC meetings and the first thing they ask is, where are you? Where are you? Where are you? But they don't know that on the day-to-day. They haven't talked to each other. They are not talking about how they're going about the lessons. And so we need to really dive into what this looks like. And so we've used a lot of resources the same way that we are helping teachers visualize and experience the math classroom. You need to help them visualize and experience the adult learning community. So it's through doing math together that gets at both of these visions. Use of video of our students, reading together, reading literature and research, and getting into each other's classrooms and making our practice public. All of that supports both of these visions. And then as you go through, how is your PD and coaching recognizing and building on the strengths of your students and teachers, and in particular, your students of color, your students who have individualized learning plans, your multilingual students? How are you helping teachers unpack the biases and really believe that our students are mathematically brilliant? Are you making space for teacher reflection? And are you then thinking about where are their key leverages? The curriculum is in front of all teachers. PD and coaching often doesn't see every single teacher. This is what happens when I look at the chat. Okay, I need to stop looking at the chat. Key leverage areas will help us make focus areas for our professional development and our coaching. And then how are you designing professional learning opportunities to make connections for our teachers across the many spaces that they're attending, if they're attending other professional developments, across the content from year to year, to research, and to their community strengths and the challenges that are also in front of them? And are your leaders attending to equity? It is extremely important that is the same way that we would attend to equity, making sure that our students are all participating, looking at who is participating and who is not. The same thing is true for adults, to be attending to it in the classroom and with teachers, and that we are supporting our our leaders to build out. I'm sorry, I'm losing, but that is not the question I had. Right. So how is support for leaders built into your structures? How can we, are you having coaching or a PLC across? I know I say coaches, you might be a math specialist. So the people who are supporting teachers, they need support as well. Go ahead and go through this. I think I had meant to skip the other slide. Yeah. So as you're working to create sustainable change, it's essential to consider the site learning community of teachers as the unit of change, whether that be a math department or a whole site of teachers. We cannot do this work alone. We need to keep equity at the center of what's possible for our students, and we need to give examples of who can do mathematics. And we need to be able to attend to teachers' identities and to our own identities as leaders in this work. It is essential for our coaches and leaders to learn together about our visions. And again, those of you who are leading for the change, you have to keep the visions in mind. So how can you support the vision through not only your policy, but through curriculum, PD, and through coaching?
Okay, nice job, Angela. All right, I'm going to talk a little bit about school scheduling. That this really does come into play when you're detracking, because you're going to be changing your school scheduling, or if you're in a district, you're going to be changing multiple school scheduling. So we define school scheduling as a plan and procedure for how teachers and students will sort into various courses. And one of the frameworks we relied on to understand school scheduling was Domina and colleagues' concept of school level sorting practices. So they divide up these school level sorting practices into 5 categories. And you'll see there starts to be this overlap, some overlapping themes with some of the things that Angela was talking about. So number 1, the design of the class content can be a way that sorting is happening. One class can have different content than others, and that relies often on the curriculum. The level, quote unquote, of the class content, is it above, at, or below what's considered grade level standards? Another way that school level sorting happens is with students' exposure within courses to students with different skill levels. Another way sorting happens is students' movement between courses at different levels. So you heard Angela talk about how often students get into levels or different tracks and they don't change over time. And then students' movement between class levels across courses on different subjects. We also want to point out, in addition to these sorting practices and that scheduling can influence, that actually student characteristics and teacher characteristics, as well as their preferences, may influence the sorting of students and teachers into classrooms during your scheduling. For example, you might have really senior teachers that say, hey, I only want to teach the high level math, or what's seen as calculus, right? Or those different classes with maybe traditionally older students. I saw in the chat someone talking about teachers' beliefs and how to influence teachers' beliefs. We're calling that out here, that actually influences these sorting practices. Similarly, with student characteristics or students' preferences, for example, in the state of California, there are very specific requirements, as are in other states, for working with multilingual learners or students that are labeled English learners, that actually and those characteristics may influence how students are sorted into their school. So this is a way of thinking about school scheduling through those sorting practices. So we want to propose that when you are working in detracking, the ideal approach to take is to focus on equity-centered school schedules. And in order to do this takes intentional planning by staff to support student access and opportunity to learn. I see a lot of questions about, well, how did you handle this and how did you handle this? I would also go back just to the context, that everyone's context, whether your school, your district, your state, is going to be a little bit different, and is also going to influence how these schedules work. You know, does your school start at 7 or does it start at 9? Does it have 7 periods or 8 periods? But what's most important here is that school schedules are created by personnel in different roles and using various processes. You know, one place for you to start when you're on detracking journey is just saying, okay, who is the person in each school or in your school that actually makes those decisions? And what is the process that they use to create the school schedule? Sometimes it boils down to one person, maybe an assistant principal, maybe a head teacher. School leaders' rules about when to give students access to courses actually influence scheduling and consequently students' opportunities to learn. Similarly, if you're going to be creating equitable school schedules by centering students, we would encourage you to center perspectives of students that historically underserved. For example, I was talking about multilingual learners earlier. What is it like for multilingual learners to go through the process of navigating their schedules? How are they accessing courses? What opportunities do they have to learn? We would encourage you to think about applying universal design principles. And what universal design principles are is building in designs of your school schedule that make the reality better for everyone. You know, an example of this might be starting your school day earlier, because generally that benefits all students to get more sleep. Exploring different arrangements of class times. Many of you may have used double blocks or longer course periods, maybe even shorter course period, adjusting your passing period. These all come into play when you're changing your scheduling. So we encourage you, if you want to go after an equitable school schedule, to conduct an audit of your students' access to learning opportunities through your current schedule. And I think it helps to pick a subgroup to start with and see, okay, do our students who are multilingual learners, what access do they have? Students who have certain disabilities, what access do they have? So some considerations for your scheduling conversations that are going to be happening at your schools or districts. So what are the current strengths and areas for growth in your math team as related to your vision? So before you dive into scheduling, you know, there could be some strengths and areas for growth that you want to actually use your schedule to either support or buffer. So think about that. Common planning time. When you're building a schedule, can you provide those common prep periods for teachers? This will be especially important if you're detracking, to provide extra professional learning time and time for colleagues to work together. Course teams. Do you have a strong teaching team apprenticing students in your math program? So maybe there's certain teachers working with certain students that, again, are affecting those sorting practices when you're making those schedules. And there's certain teachers and students you want to pay attention to. Keep those in mind. And then last but not least, new teacher support. Are there members of your team who might grow through mentoring? How is your school scheduling used to support apprenticing new teachers? Oftentimes, new teachers are put in classes that are seen as harder classes to teach. But another way to think about school scheduling is actually creating school schedules that allow them to have peer observation or times with meeting with more veteran teachers. So scheduling supports both teachers and students in your journey to detrack your math classes. Okay, so we are going to, we're going to answer questions in a little bit, and I'm going to just wrap it up with this. I think this is our last section. One thing that San Francisco and other districts that are working to detrack, I even saw a quote in the chat about, well, the research says, we're saying, ding, ding, ding. We think it's actually really important when you go to detrack to integrate data, evidence, and research into your decision-making. We think it would be really helpful. So we want to make sure we define what those terms mean. So evidence, that can be any information that you collect to inform your conclusion. That could be evidence from your own experience. You also could collect evidence by taking notes and observations on a daily basis as a leader or a teacher. So there can be lots of forms of evidence. It could be a report that your district put out or your school put together. It could be a survey from students. Data is information collected that is specifically aimed at supporting some sort of analysis. So, for example, most states are requiring school districts to collect some achievement data, attendance data, but there also could be data on what courses students are enrolled in. And another source of data could be just looking at those course pathways and how many of those course pathways do you have? And then last but not least, research is a really different type of evidence and different type of data in that it presents a systematic collection of a certain phenomena and elements in hopes of advancing what is known as theory. And which not all research actually does in fact advance theory, but that's the intent of it over time. But we want to give a caveat that we understand that your decision making is going to have lots of different sources of evidence and sources of data. And we realize that research is only one slice of evidence that practitioners will use to inform decisions about tracking. And that's really important. But what would we encourage you to do is go out there and use it. And research on detracking and math courses are related to curriculum, instruction, professional development, coaching, school schedules, and impacts of policies related to math tracking or detracking. There's a lot of research out there, but you can see there's lots of other evidence here that you're going to be referencing. It could be that you're looking, you've gone to attend a town hall and there's perspectives from families. You could see a survey or a poll in your local newspaper about how people feel about detracking. You could have your own personal experience, and we understand that those things will go into your decision making, but we would encourage you to have one slice of it be research. And so, one thing we would also encourage you to do is that there are some certain ways we would encourage you to use research. So, when you're using research to design new policies and practices, one thing we might encourage you to do is go and consult a researcher. So hopefully, I think most of you maybe that are on this call did your certificate, your teacher training, or your administrative certificate, or maybe researchers yourself or policymakers. At some point, you got training at a research institute or a university and either maybe worked with a faculty that did math work or detracking. Go call them up if you know them or you have relationships with them. Consult those. We encourage you to, especially the local researchers that you may or may not have relationships with. Also, many school and district leaders and classroom teachers love reading books by researchers, and we really encourage you to do that. We think this is a great source. Get your summer read on and look at, what is Jeannie Oakes saying, or what are the other researchers that are out there talking about detracking like that, Domina? What are they saying about what they know about detracking? And then research can be a really powerful form of evidence to use as a rationale for the policy. But one caveat is that the research needs to make sense to people. So again, think about your community context and what research finding would resonate with them. Think about your elected officials and your community members. What are the research findings that are going to be understandable and comprehensible for them? Are there certain research findings that your teachers, families, and students find that that resonates more with you or them? And then also, one of the things San Francisco did and other school districts and schools have done is they partner with researchers to evaluate the policy decisions that they're making. And there are many forms of research practice partnerships that can help you actually participate in research to study the policy changes and the detracking efforts that you're doing. And we would encourage you to do this. So now comes the fun part. We're going to look to Margaret, and she is going to suss out which questions to ask us.
Yeah, and I think you, some of the questions that did come up in the chat you have addressed, but I think one thing is that, that staff buy-in can be difficult, and how do you overcome objectives by current and future teachers?
Can I add one thing to that, just on that last note? I've seen a lot of schools where you do have that you lack consensus conceptually of what is the vision for math. And that I would go back to reading a common book that you all had in common or two. It's a great way to explore the topic together and build buy-in. Even if you read that book and you don't agree, at least you have this common boundary object that you can debate and you can get your ideas out. And that can be a starting place. Pass it to Angela.
Yeah, that's a great example, Laura. It's how can we support them understanding the vision and what's possible? So I had a little list, I think, at one point around doing math, the use of video of your students doing math, trying to get into each other's classrooms. And then it does go all back to beliefs. And so like the premise in San Francisco around all students being mathematically brilliant is there to really undo the deficit thinking that people have around particular groups of people and mathematics. And so that's something you have to keep working on, keep coming back to. The vision statement supports, this is what, it's just making it very transparent of what you're going for. And then thinking about, let's also have some premises about our teachers. All teachers care about their kids and about their practice. And let's make that assumption to work with. And now how can we move forward so that we are supporting our students in this journey, that we are working to excavate their strengths and their brilliance, versus trying to save them or, I'm there to support you. Like there's other ideas of caring for your kids by maybe over scaffolding, but that's where the understanding around what is mathematics comes to play as well. And so I think you need to just continue to have these experiences, even if you don't have a coach. Like coaching comes with funding. And I saw that kind of question in the chat. It is around, do you have one teacher that you are the teacher and you are the leader of the PLC? What activities can you go through together, including doing math together and doing some reading?
Thank you. And then a couple of questions came up about parents and how do you deal with parents who want their children to accelerate and parents who registered students for summer coursework and advancement?
Yeah, you are going to come against pushback. And I saw Bettina Love a couple weeks ago speak, and she was saying, you have to expect it. If you are doing the work of equity, you have to expect pushback. And again, it comes from assuming that parents want what's best for their kids. That's me speaking, not Bettina Love. But so how can we, you have to just keep educating them. I think at some point, I was talking about the difference of the old Algebra 1 and the new Algebra 1. And because we didn't go to an integrated course pathway in high school, that was an area where we had to really work on having those conversations with parents and having diagrams translated. We speak to this in the book, but understanding your context, understanding the different groups of families and groups of parents, what they might need, leveraging, the local universities around you, leveraging the research around you, because you're just one person from central office or a couple people from central office. It's not about what Angela says or what Laura says. It's about, here's what other people say. And for us, one of the things we did in San Francisco was create a position paper and go through making that into smaller bits for parents and families. And it's something that's ongoing. It's not something that you did it once and you did it for a couple of years and that's it, because parents continue to, move up the grade levels with their kids. And so you've got new groups of families to continue to talk to, but sometimes hearing it from a local professor at a prestigious university is what's going to get the leverage for your community.
And then someone else had said that they have had issues with students who accelerate, stop completing math in 10th grade, and don't want to take additional courses in 11th and 12th. Do you set contracts or have a way to counteract this?
We didn't do contracts. I think again, our high school graduation requirements was 3 years. So they have to take 3 years of math. So it's really thinking about the fourth year. And again, it's working with myself and my colleague would work with our department chairs, all the high school department chairs in monthly meetings. And we would show them the data of here's the number of your 12th graders. And we'd break it down in percentage, taking fourth year math options. And then we'd break it down by race and ethnicity. And so we'd have conversations. And for one teacher, it was really important to see the other school's data, because then it gave her leverage to come back to her principal as an advocate and say, we need to do better. This is what's happening in other schools. And there was some systematic structural pieces that were preventing it in their school for other reasons. And so it's allowing those conversations to happen. And again, frontlining that with research and with what our national organizations were saying around, we need all students to take 4 years of mathematics that had come out recently, and NCTM's catalyzing change. And so that's important for teachers to understand. Why might we want our teachers or why might we want our students to take 4 years? Let's unpack it.
And we could probably continue this conversation for more than an hour, but before we wrap up, I will end it on this question. What is your number one lesson learned that you would be willing to share with us?
Can I go, Angela?
Yeah.
I do feel like that lesson, and we shared it, that leadership matters. Leadership can either undermine or can support what you have when you're dealing with parents, teachers. And so if you're a teacher coming to this and you don't have support from your leaders, that's going to be challenging. So one of the things you could think about is how could you build leadership at a different level? But we do talk a bit about that. And again, it relates back to your context, but really you'll see in the vignettes in the book, we talk about how important in San Francisco that leadership was, and it wasn't a one and done, that the leaders had to keep talking about it and presenting about it to the community and the board, even as we had transitions in superintendents.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you both. And thank you everyone for joining us today. A big thank you again to Angela Torres and Laura Wentworth for this important conversation. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good night. Thank you for being here.